Greetings and welcome to Aspects of Aliyah. Thank you for joining me over this past few months as we've examined the biblical, Hebraic and historical aspects of Aliyah. So we're going to move on to a new series of teachings which we're going to entitle The Word from Jerusalem, or News from Jerusalem, or Jerusalem Today. I haven't quite made our mind up yet which title we'll use. However, I've just been away for a month. I spent a good amount of time in Israel, particularly Jerusalem. And I really felt that the Lord put it in my heart that at least for the next few months we should concentrate on the centrality of Jerusalem, and also people's days, lives there, past, present, and future, where those who make Aliyah are going to find their centrality of identity, and other articles. So let me start by saying this. I've been to Israel 23 times. First time in 1986, where I was completely awestruck. An old rabbi, very ancient rabbi, said this to me. He said, if you walk the streets of Jerusalem with love in your heart, your life will never be the same again. And for me, that is one of the greatest truths anybody ever spoke to me. So, went there this time. I've been for a couple of years. And it was a comment that my middle son actually made to me when he said, you know, Dad, you taught me one thing. Whenever you go anywhere, don't look down because all you see is the floor. Look up, and within the architecture, you see the whole history of the place that you've been. He said, and you know, he says another thing. He said, I realised, you know, not just to see things, I also realised to look at them and absorb them. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I need to take a dose of my own medicine. So while we were over there, in Jerusalem in particular, I was very impressed by a number of things. Now, of an evening in the United Kingdom and in major cities in the States, families would not go out by themselves in the evening after 6, 7 o'clock at night because of fears of violence, civil disturbances, and so on. Over in Israel, right until 10 o'clock at night, particularly in Jerusalem, the streets were crowded, including Ben Yehuda, Jaffa Road. Whole families, loads of children, sitting in sidewalk cafes, sitting on benches, and professional groups of singers, dancers, and musicians performing for free, well-known national artists, to raise money for soldiers or for those in need. You don't have that in the UK. I guess you don't have it in the US either. It was very impressive. And when it says pray for the peace of Jerusalem, it looks to me like that prayer's been answered, despite the sirens there and everything else. In the time we were there, we only had 3 warnings. But you can get an app on your phone, and then all of a sudden it vibrates. Not like a normal vibration, but much more than that. Yeah, your screen lights up like a flashlight, the siren goes off, and it tells you you've got 1.5 minutes to get to a place of safety. And interestingly enough, leave after 10 minutes, obviously on the assumption that the incoming has been knocked out. It was a wonderful time, but there's certain peace and dignity in Jerusalem. After Shabbat, thousands of people walking from A to B. You go on the streets, hundreds of people walking from A to B, people stopping and talking, street musicians, street bands. At the end of Ben Huber, they've got a grand piano, professional pianist. Oh, it's just so different. So, those who pay for the peace of Jerusalem, even though it might not appeal so, it's really there. So that was a primary observation of mine. Now then, what we're going to do is, as I say, this last episode of Aspects of Aliyah, at the break, and then we're going to move on to the centrality of Jerusalem for a week or two, and then I'm going to bring to you news from Jerusalem, which will not be news in the traditional sense of it. It'll be an overview of what's happening and how it fits in with what the Bible says about Jerusalem and Jewish society. So before I get to the break, I want to share, I haven't done this before, I want to share a couple of testimonies with you about people who made Aliyah under Ezra. Now the first one is a young lady whose testimony I feel is quite extraordinary. I thought she was the most extraordinary young lady I've ever met. So, she was from a family who were struggling with their identification, and then the parents decided that they needed to establish their Jewish roots and make Aliyah. So this young lady at the age of 14 found herself moved from a West Country, very comfortable location, to Manchester, where she was moved from a secular school to a religious Jewish school, which was really quite a shock to the system. However, very quickly, she found herself as part of the Youth Zionist movement, and when she was 15 and 16, she went to Israel for 2 weeks with one of the Youth Zionist movements. After she came back, a further Zionist, even at that age, but totally au fait with what it meant to be Jewish and the future and destiny, not just herself and family, the whole Jewish people in the world. So at 16, with the parents, the 2 siblings, some of the other siblings stayed behind, so they found themselves in the land of Israel, making Aliyah. She'd only been there a few months when she got a call of papers for IDF. She knew that was going to happen, but even so, 16 and a half, it's a bit of a shock, isn't it? So she gladly accepted this and worked extremely hard on her language skills and educational skills. This extraordinary young woman, at the age of 18, found herself in a position where the call-up was imminent, and because she had taken the extra lessons and everything, she found herself not just being part of the draft, being put on the side as somebody of his exception in the future. So, happily, we witnessed transmission, as they call it, and she goes to university for a year before she puts the uniform on as a sergeant for 2 years and then will become an officer. Though she really feels in her heart that God has called her to be a professional soldier and have that as a career. I personally found that quite extraordinary. And this young lady, this extraordinary young lady, yeah, who could have had a career in many other fields, I feel, thought that's what I've called it to. I'll leave that one with you. Another one was a lady who is part of a ministry that I was director for a good number of years, named Chesed, or Messianic Chesed, if you like. Ran Ukraine for a good number of years, that looked after people who couldn't make Aliyah because they were too sick, too old, couldn't get the documents because they didn't have a family once the vice was in Germany. Well, that work obviously finished about the time of the Russian invasion, but we kept on, and Hesed became, what was left of it became absorbed into Ezra. And this concerns Dr. Elena, who at 40 years old fell down the staircase in the high-rise block of flats that she lived in, fractured pelvis and several bones. And because there's no NHS in Ukraine and incomes are low, she found herself captive in her apartment, unable to move until we found her. So we looked after her, did the best we could for her, paid for some small medical things because we didn't have the tens of thousands of dollars that we needed. And we managed to get her to see some private patients. She was a specialist in geriatrics, old people's medicine, which made it incredibly difficult to get them to run this high rise. But as she fell down the stairs, her lifts weren't working. Any of you that's familiar with Ukraine would know that was the case anyway. So we looked after this lady for over 18 years. She couldn't make Aliyah because she got no family. She couldn't make Aliyah because she had nobody to go to. She couldn't make Aliyah because of medical condition and so on. Somewhat miraculously, just recently, a certain individual who doesn't support any of the work that we do anyway, but supported something else that we did some years ago, put what was the finances that we needed up for us to go. So while we're over there, she got there, and then through our contacts with Ezra, we're able to find a place for her. She'd been undergoing some surgery, and at the age of currently 60, she'll do a year's course and be able to practice again over there. God knows, yeah. If we can't do it from one way, we'll get it from another. But I think she's desperate to go to Jerusalem. If she wanted to go anywhere else, I don't think it'd happen. As I say, the finances weren't massive actually, but through our contacts, we've been able to facilitate this. And I've got several other stories. They're all, in one sense, some of these centered around Jerusalem, because it was the desire to be there and to worship there that availed some of these things. For myself, I've been there many, many times. I've been for a few years actually, but this time it brought all back to me what that rabbi said to me. And if I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill, my tongue cleaves to my mouth. I've written a number of books over the years. The forthcoming one was a theology of Israel that centers on Jerusalem. I think it's almost ready. So I just say when I was there, I was enthused about it, but now I'm on fire for it. Open with you in September. So, I'll see you after the break.
If you are a Christian then there is no question that you owe a great debt to the Jewish people. Unto them were entrusted the oracles of God. What does that mean? It means, if not for the faithfulness of the Jewish people, we would not have this. And therefore you would not know your God, and you would not know his Son.
Israel and the Jewish people are under attack right now, and we owe them everything. The least that we can do is support them in their hour of need. So please go to EzraInternational.org and give to the Emergency Relief Fund, and your dollars will be used to help displaced and traumatized Jewish people throughout the land.
And remember, if you do nothing, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jewish people from another place. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Please go to EzraInternational.org and give your best gift today.
Welcome back. So, I spoke to you about my own passion for Jerusalem. I spoke to you about a couple of testimonies, how people love Jerusalem and the effects of Aliyah, which you might not have even thought about. So what I want to do is I want to start my first piece on the view from Jerusalem. So what I want to speak about, as I said, for the first delivery broadcast is the centrality of Jerusalem. So the Hebrew Bible mentions Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, 669 times. And one of the reasons that the emphasis is on Yerushalayim is that many of the mitzvot, commandments, can only be performed within its environments, and some of them within the temple, which we'll be looking at in a week or so. So I think, very importantly, the name Zion, which usually refers to Jerusalem, but sometimes the land of Israel, is an important aspect of this because it appears in the Hebrew Bible 152 times. It may come as a bit of a surprise to some people that the biblical record illustrates that Jerusalem actually doesn't appear in the very early narratives of what we might call the initial parts of the patriarchal period. Okay, it's obvious that Jerusalem isn't going to appear in the eschatological narratives. Well, it could have done, but it doesn't. But biblical history, as we tend to call it, which I think is a bit erroneous, to be honest with you, what we call history proper really starts at Genesis 11, the Abraham cycle, followed by the Joseph cycle, followed by the Exodus. But as I said, Yerushalayim of Zion don't appear in the patriarchal period. Interestingly enough, other sites, Canaanite cities, do appear. Hebron, Beersheba, and Shechem feature more prominently in narratives of this time. So, where was Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is set on an even plateau, some 30 miles from the Mediterranean Sea. I'm pleased that in the UK, where it's raining as usual, by the way, in the US we still use miles rather than kilometres. Never got made quite around it. But the city, Yerushalayim, historically has changed hands at least 35 times within its recorded history, covering over 3 millennia. Though the history suggests that initially the site was a small settlement, more than possibly an Egyptian fortress upon the hill or Mount Ochel, adjacent to the old walled city. So before the old walled city, there's a fortress. Now, when I say fortress, maybe in modern ideas you think of a city with great big walls and turrets and embattlements and all this. Yeah, a fortress was nothing more than a bunch of sticks and ditches in those days, with maybe a couple of watchtowers. But even so, it was considered to be strategic from the Egyptian military point of view. So the first biblical reference referring to what we might call an established settlement there is termed as Shalem, Salem, from Semra to Shalom. Although in those days, Salem by itself just means a high place, as for instance Genesis 14:18. But religiously and for biblical purposes, we're probably better referring to Jerusalem as Zion. Some scholars, including myself, inclined to believe that the name of the nation, Zion, is also related to the stronghold of Zion, as being taken by David in 2 Samuel 5:7, whereas the etymology and meaning of the name Zion remains obscure. City or location has got the sense of meaning impregnable, can't be defeated. The stronghold par excellence. And notice that 2 Samuel 5:6 records that the Jebusites, as residents there, taunted the Israelites as they attempted to attack it, proclaiming the city could be defended and repulsed by the blind and the lame. Goodness me, that's quite a comment, isn't it? Defended by the blind and the lame. The great Jewish historian, who's considered to be the authority on Jewish history, with some limitations by people such as myself, although a lot of it, although not entirely reliable, is at least based on elements of truth. Josephus relates that it was a reality that, in fact, the blind and the lame were lifted up on the walls to taunt the Israelites in order to insult them. However, David did take the city. So scholarly consensus assumes that the title or designation Zion be a pre-Israelite name for the hill upon which Jerusalem was actually built, and then eventually took on the idea of not only a fortress but something that was impregnable. And it should be noted in biblical texts, Zion, it very often refers to the city rather than the geographical location. The city, not the hill. However, current scholarship refers to regard this, but I will agree with that. Zion should be interested as a fortress, not a geographical location and not a city, because a city as such wasn't built at that time. So, Zion appears in the Old Testament 152 times as a title for Jerusalem. Interestingly, and I find this quite fascinating, over half of these occurrences, half of 152 times, appear in 2 books. Book of Isaiah, 46 times, and the Psalms, 38 times. More than half, not quite 2/3, but enough to point to the centrality of the concept. It also appears 7 times in the New Testament. So, if we take these instances as mostly, I think say that mostly, as appearing in Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and in Tehillim, Psalms, Zion seems to be containing distinctly prophetic dimensions, seldom appearing in ordinary prose construct. Why is it important that it's poetic and prophetic, not than simple prose constructs? Simply, Zion is employed to emphasize religious and also emotional qualities of the importance of Yerushalayim both the royal city and the site of Mount Zion, and this is important, is the place where Yahweh, Jehovah Yahweh, the God of Israel, dwells. Isaiah 8:18, Psalm 74:2, where the God of Israel's presence rests is better than wherever he dwells. It's also a place where he's king, Isaiah 24:23, and importantly, where he has installed his representative king David. Remember, in Wright, David means beloved. As we spoke about previously, David is probably a crown name rather than his initial name, El-Hanan, that was discussed earlier. But where is he installed his king David? Psalm 2:6. On occasion, Jerusalem is spoken of as the daughter of Zion, always in a context charged with feelings aroused by the ideas, and oddly they stand opposite to each other. It's his daughter that suffers during the destruction of Jerusalem, but also his daughter in terms of deliverance as we move into the time of the Babylonian exile and their return. Jerusalem has many other epithes that reply to it, which we'll look at later. But through our history of the exile, the occupation, the servitude and the galut, the exile, Jerusalem always returns central in Jewish thought. By the rivers of Babylon, where we lay down, when we wept, when we remembered not Jerusalem, but Zion. Jerusalem, yes, but Zion, more importantly. Psalm 137. Then the Pesach meal. Lashon Haba, Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. The heart of the Jewish people resides in Jerusalem. Their hope is in Jerusalem. The Lord reigns from Jerusalem. And all called by his name are called to celebrate the feast in Jerusalem. So, much more to say. Because it's Zion, there's a scene of the Lord's messianic salvation. It's to Zion that exiles will be restored in Jeremiah 3:14. It's there that we'll find the Lord in Jeremiah 31. So Zion came to mean not only the Jewish homeland, but became symbolic of Judaism, the central point of Jewish national operation. The Jewish aspiration was for Zion. In the movement that was called the Zionist movement, not the Israelite movement, not the Jewish movement, not the Aliyah movement, but the Zionist, the Zionist movement. Zion is where God is. The focus of redemption. So I do hope you've introduced. I do beg your pardon. Please do this. Oh, Rick. I do hope you've enjoyed my introduction to our new initiative. So, as always, God be with you until we meet again. And Shalom Alachem.